Tragedy as young mother, 29, dies from cervical cancer after her symptoms were blamed on her being pregnant. Samantha Beaven had been suffering from bleeding and cramping. Despite 8 medical appointments, doctors said her pregnancy was to blame. Only diagnosed after going into labor at 26 weeks, having 2 lb2 baby. Her devastated family had sold their possessions and moved into cheaper rented property to pay for treatment in Mexico to try and extend her life. A young mother whose symptoms of cervical cancer were passed off as pregnancy complications has died aged 29. Samantha Beaven had suffered from bleeding and cramping, but doctors attributed it to her being pregnant. She was only diagnosed when she went into premature labor at 26 weeks, and her daughter Daisy was born weighing just 2 lb2s. Her devastated family sold their possessions and moved into cheaper rented property to pay for treatment in Mexico to try and extend her life. Her 6-year-old daughter Bracken even sold her toys on eBay to help raise funds. But Mrs. Beaven died yesterday, just days after returning from Mexico, her devastated family announced today. Tragically, she had been responding well to pioneering treatment to try and extend her time with her family. She had hoped the treatment would grant her more time with daughters Daisy, now 1, Bracken, and husband Alex, 27. But she developed a lung infection which medics were unable to treat and passed away suddenly, just days after flying back to the UK. Mr. Beaven will now give up his job in a warehouse to look after their daughters, and friends have vowed to raise funds to help support the family. Mrs. Beaven's close friend Wendy Campling said, "Our beautiful brave friend Sam passed away, but we are determined to raise what we can for her children, because Sam was a devoted mother." The whole family fought with all their might to try and prolong her life and the time she had left with them. Sam was so proud of Bracken, who even sold her toys to raise funds to try and save her mummy. They are utterly heartbroken, but this fight has left them with nothing. She said at the time, "I felt strongly something was wrong, because it had not happened with my first pregnancy. I knew there was a problem, but eventually I just had to accept what doctors and nurses were telling me, and that it was just normal." But when she felt contractions at just 26 weeks into her pregnancy, she rushed to the Royal Sussex County Hospital in Brighton. There, her cervix was examined for the first time. Doctors confirmed she was already 2 cm dilated, but there was also a lesion causing the bleeding. After a biopsy, they then gave her the devastating news that the 7 cm mass was cancerous. Suddenly it became clear that all the symptoms she had reported, bleeding, cramping, pains, backache and discharge, had not triggered alarm bells, because they are also associated with pregnancy. Just 3 days later, her waters broke, and Daisy was born on October 27, 2013. Despite the odds being stacked against her, Mrs. Beaven refused to give up hope and began chemotherapy and radiotherapy days later. During this period, Mrs. Beaven worked tirelessly to support premature baby charity Push for Prems after receiving support from the Brighton-based charity when Daisy was born. She took part in sponsored events wearing her trademark brightly colored wigs and collected hundreds in donations to help other premature babies. The charity's head Catherine Demier, who became close friends with Mrs. Beaven, recalled, "Despite what she was going through, Sam was incredible. In one collection din alone she raised over 400 in donations. She was amazing in helping to put together our fundraiser despite that fact she was having treatment, looking after a premature baby and older daughter. She was an inspiration." But despite chemotherapy, the cancer spread, and the family pinned their hopes on pioneering treatment in Mexico, selling possessions, and moving into a rented property to help fund it. Mrs. Beaven flew out in February and was thought to be responding well to treatment. But tragically, she developed a lung infection shortly after arriving back in the UK last week. She died at the same hospital that delivered her daughter with her mother and husband by her side. Mrs. Campling said, "She never gave up. She was an amazing, courageous woman who refused to believe she would be parted from her beautiful daughters." Sam was passionate about raising awareness of cervical cancer. She didn't want this to happen to any other woman, and she felt strongly that her condition could have been diagnosed earlier. She would want her story to save lives. We, her friends, cannot think of a more fitting tribute to such an incredible mom.